you all know, the second, and I covered my paper was over the lawyers and litigation in Congress. And one of the big aspects that I covered is not only the number in Congress of how it was and how it is now with the 112th Congress and going forward, but also the aspect of how most people see lawyers in Congress, which I found crazy to find out that it was used so negatively. And just the aspect of in Congress, granted there are certain aspects that they deal with security, budgets, and a lot of other aspects, but just because Congress in essence implements laws and makes laws. I'll first cover the number, which as you can see, this is the representatives, the House of Representatives. The CQ Press revealed that the household held 38 different primary occupations in selected Congress since 1945. The most common, as you can see, are agriculture, business or banking, congressional aid, education, and law. Attorneys dominated among the House between the 79th and the 92nd Congress, which had 40% of the representatives listing professional law backgrounds as their primary profession. However, as you can see, starting in the 92nd Congress, it did start to decline. Since 1945, the number of representatives declined to about 20 to 25%. Today, there are also as many representatives who previously worked in banking and business as there are lawyers, with banking and businessmen making up 21.3% of the House. And as you can see, the number has dwindled down. And I mean, law with banking or business is right about definitely the higher aspect of when it comes to careers. Going to the next part of the Congress, which is the senators, lawyers have occupied around 1/3 to half of the seats in the Senate of Congress since 1945. The 92nd Congress is where members in the Senate peaked at 51% of the representative being trained in the legal profession. However, in the 112th Congress, it has also declined around 37%. Banking and business has gradually been absorbing a large share of the Senate, going from a low of 11.46% of senators in the 79th Congress to 20% in today's Senate. And one of the videos I'll actually share with you is one that I found that kind of quite interesting, that this is how most of the talks online you will find about how people view lawyers in Congress. And this one was aired August 5th, 2011 in the show Real Time with Bill Mayer. It's Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, an astrophysicist, and this is actually his take of lawyers in Congress.
Trying to solve it.
I'm concerned about Congress. I checked these numbers. 57% of the Senate, 38% of the House cite law as their profession. And when you look at law, law is, well, what happens in the courtroom? It doesn't go to what's right. It goes to who argues best. And there's this urge, the entire profession is founded on who the best arguers are.
Right. It's not, a courtroom is not about the truth. It's about that the theory, if I get what you're saying, is that each side argues their version, and then the truth somehow emerges.
That's the premise. However, the practice, which, for example, is bred in debating teams, for example, where you know the subject, but you don't know what side you're going to be put on to argue.
Right.
And so the act of arguing and not agreeing seems to be fundamental to that profession, and Congress is half that profession. And I realized this when I was a kid. I was 12, and I said, well, I wonder what profession all these senators and Congress are. Law, businessman, law. And I said, they're no scientists. We're the engineers. Where's the rest of life represented here? And so when I look at the conflicts, the argumentative conflicts, I just sit back and say, can I buy an engineer, please? Or put a business person who knows how to make a hard but significant financial decision, because at the end of the day they got to make their books work.
But I think that is part of it. It's okay. I like screening. It's a time to screen.
See, and you can see that's how a lot of people view lawyers in Congress. That it should be, and not exactly a representative of our people, but definitely have a more extended grasp of how our society is built upon, and that lawyers are not fundamentally who our typical U.S. citizens are. I reviewed a lot of journals, a lot of clinical journals, starting with Lawyers in Congress, and you look at some old assumptions. It was actually part of a paper developed in 1973, viewed upon the typical aspect of what people thought of lawyers and how they really were at that time. The paper reveals the percentage of how they voted compared to how they were as attorneys. And they did see that they go into litigation in such a vast majority of argument that they got more compromises around that time and made more laws that were, in essence, thorough than having laws that were just passed just because they didn't have a full grasp of what, the current precedents were. And the next journal that I reviewed was The Influence of Oral Argument in the U.S. Hierarchy. And that one I found very interesting because it was in the American Political Science Review back in 2006. It was one of the more recent journals I found. And the biggest thing about it is it puts in that with the influence of oral argument, if we truly have influence on, especially when it comes to congressmen or any kind of congressmen or representatives, that more would come out of it than if it wasn't there. If they had higher viewpoints of compromise and arguments, then they'd be less likely to have something passed go wrong than have something passed that would actually fulfill what it was made for. And the last one that journal I reviewed was Do Lawyers Vote Differently? And it was kind of a study of voting on no-fault insurance in the state Congress of California. And it was the viewpoint that most of the representatives in California voted differently compared to any other state, and they were all lawyers. All right, and the next aspect that I brought upon was the difference in when people argue the idea of numbers. Okay, our first U.S. Congress had 91 total members, 65 representatives, and 26 senators. 34 were lawyers, 15 were soldiers, and the number keeps on going. But there's only like four to six other categories, and that was it. Where if you looked at the 112th Congress, there's 539 total members, there was 435 representatives, 100 senators, and 6 non-voting members. 209 were businessmen and businesswomen, and 200 were lawyers. And from then on, there's literally 15 to 16 other categories. And that's just the big aspect of that. And if you think about it, many Congress members list more than one profession as their total professions and what they add up. And this article I actually found here this last month, and I really wish I would have kind of honed in on this one earlier, is the idea of, is too many lawyers in Congress a bad thing, or are they not the right kind? Just due to the fact that it has a quote here from Nancy Pelosi's. She says, legislators have to pass bills to find out what's in it. And that's literally a quote she stated. And the thing that gets me kind of annoyed about this aspect is that there are lawyers out there that they don't actually read legislation that are congressmen, and they rely on their leadership or staff to tell them what the bill provides. And they're themselves, they're passing along their own duties instead of doing what they're voted for. And if you actually, if you did that in the practice of law, that'd be malpractice. In a heartbeat, you'd get sued and possibly even lose your license. If we have attorneys that are fulfilling what they did in the professions before as congressmen, then we might not get as much passed as quickly, but we'd at least get better laws passed and a better understanding of the give or take of Congress, which that's in essence what they should be, representing us. And the whole idea of lawyers in Congress now is such a negative, people even use them in their ads. And I'll show you a video. This is from one of the most powerful commercial ads in 2010 for a senator, that he uses that aspect that not being a lawyer is such a good thing.
There are 100 members of the U.S. Senate. 57 of them, including Russ Feingold, are lawyers. That would be fine if we had a lawsuit to settle. But we have an economy to fix. There are 0 manufacturers and 1 accountant. It's no wonder we're losing jobs and piling up debt. I'm not a politician. I'm an accountant and a manufacturer. I know how to balance a budget, and I do know how to create jobs. Now that's something we could really use. I'm Ron Johnson, and I approve this message.
Right there in both videos, you can see how, they use that, the budget. They got to work the books, which granted is one of the biggest issues, Congress is facing. And it's one of the biggest things with, cuts, shortages, and, what they set with budgetary aspects of what they do. However, when it comes to laws and our society changing and needing to view those, do we want to cut the lawyers out in order to get a better budget, possibly lead to other issues that we can't come back to? I mean, in a lot of the journals I've read, it showed that you have to have a good balance of not only the type of people you have, but also the type of professions they're in. And as you see, there's definitely a lower balance of lawyers, but do we want to cut those out completely, or do we want to have a better balance? The litigation with law and Congress would have to always be there, so that as us, for U.S. citizens, we're represented conventionally in the U.S. Congress. And that's a good overview of what my paper was about.
Very good, thank you. Now, Brayton, questions?
That was good. Do you personally think we should get rid of lawyers?
I personally do not. I mean, I understand the decrease, and I definitely can see that.
And you mean get rid of attorneys in Congress, not generally speaking. It's not a Shakespearean thing. Yeah.
I think because we're always going to need new laws with our changing society, we need lawyers, period. Just because they understand where law has been, where it's at, and possibly when it comes in the future, where it needs to go.
What's really weird about this, I look at what Tyson was saying in that Bill Maher clip, and he's talking about this prevalence of attorneys. We saw that theme in the Ron Johnson ad too. And yet, if you go back to your data on the House, the number of lawyers is declining precipitously. Mm-hmm. So they're complaining about a situation that is dropping. Well, I don't know how we reconcile that. Maybe you can provide some insight there.
Well, my biggest insight is they see the big factual numbers on the very top instead of where we're at now. And especially if you look further, like, I mean, in the Senate, it's still prevailing. And I think they see that more than anything.
Mm-hmm. It's still less than half, though.
True.
Now, is some of that soaked up in the fact that so many lawyers end up getting into politics and they run for a previous office, say state representative, and so they may be an attorney, they would be in the law area, but they're actually in another category as like state office holder, something like that?
See, and when I looked at this report where that showed all of these, I mean, because this report has tons of information from military service to colleges to race, gender, everything you can imagine. But the crazy thing I found out, this is the one that provided with professions, and it's what they were literally getting paid to do before they joined Congress. And in essence, what a lot of them still do afterwards, too.
And why is there less of a decline in the Senate than there is in the House?
I put it that, I mean, just the sheer number is different. Because you have more House representatives than you do senators. Yeah,
but it's a percentage, so it should kind of even out. And we saw a decline from around the same spot. You know, the House, it was somewhere around 49, 51% back in the 79th Congress, which would have been 1974, I think. But it's down now under 30%. The Catholic decline in the Senate is less than 10%. It might actually be just 5%. So the decline is much, much less in the Senate, making the natural assumption, well, there's some kind of force affecting the House that's not affecting the Senate.
Well, and the only thing I can toss it up to is that both had a decline in the 92nd. I really didn't find any other trends coming up except for diversity and race. Definitely followed the descent when it came to the House, but not with anything in the Senate.
Could it just be explained if you're getting a law degree that's kind of in the process? Like you get your law degree, you practice law, then you go run for office. Whereas if you're an accountant, you go to school, you graduate college, you become an accountant. The next step isn't, for most accountants, well, now I'm going to run for office.
True, exactly. And a lot of them, when it came to that too, when it came to people who dealt with numbers a lot more, accountants were a lot lower, but they were kind of chalked up into banking and business.
Any other questions that you have for Frank? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.